My husband called me at 6:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I had just set my coffee down and the mug left a ring on the counter that I kept staring at while he talked. He said my mother was at our front door, that she had been there for 40 minutes, that she was sitting on the porch steps in the cold, and she wouldn't leave. I didn't say anything for a moment. He asked me what I wanted him to do. I told him I'd call him back. I sat down at my kitchen table, in my apartment, 2 states away, and I looked at that coffee ring on the counter for a long time. I thought about the last thing my mother said to me at my brother's wedding. I thought about how she said it. I thought about how everyone in that room heard it and nobody said a word. Then I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and started getting ready for work. To understand why I didn't go to the door, you have to understand what kind of house I grew up in. And to understand that, you have to understand my brother. My brother Derek is 4 years younger than me. He is charming in the way that certain people are charming effortlessly, and at everyone else's expense. Growing up, he knew exactly how to make my parents laugh. He knew exactly which version of a story to tell. He had a gift for walking into a room and becoming the center of it without appearing to try, and my parents loved him for it in a way that was so complete, so total, that there wasn't a whole lot left over. I don't say that looking for sympathy. I'm just telling you what it was. I was the older one, the responsible one, the one who got good grades and didn't cause problems and came home on time. My mother used to introduce me to her friends as the easy one, and she meant it as a compliment. I understood even then that it wasn't. Being easy meant being invisible. It meant that when there was one piece of cake left, nobody thought to ask if I wanted it. It meant that when there was a school play, my parents came to Derek's and said they were tired the night of mine. It meant that I learned very early to need very little, because needing things in that house meant competing with Derek, and Derek always won. I left for college at 17 on a partial scholarship and $3,000 I had saved from babysitting and tutoring since I was 14. I worked 20 hours a week my entire undergraduate career. I got a degree in accounting, then a second in finance, then a certification that let me work as a tax consultant. By 28, I had a salary that surprised people when I told them, and I had worked for every single dollar of it. I also sent money home. Not because anyone asked me directly. That's not how my family operated. What happened instead was that my mother would call and mention, very casually, that the water heater was making a noise, or that Derek's car needed new tires, or that Dad's prescription had gone up again. She would mention these things in the same tone she used to talk about the weather, and I would listen, and then I would transfer money from my checking account into theirs. It started at $200 a month, when I got my first real job. By the time I was 27, it was closer to $800. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I told myself families help each other. I told myself that one day, when Derek was more settled, when my parents were less stretched, things would even out. I want to be honest with you about something. Part of me also believed that if I was useful enough, if I contributed enough, if I made myself indispensable in the ways that mattered, the practical, financial, real ways, then maybe I would stop feeling like a guest in my own family. Like someone they tolerated rather than chose. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded then too. I did it anyway. Derek got engaged when he was 26. Her name is Brianna, and she is perfectly nice, and I have nothing against her. The wedding was planned for the following spring at a venue outside of Cincinnati, which is where my parents still live and where Derek had settled after college. My mother called me the moment the date was set. She didn't call to tell me. She called to ask what I could contribute toward the cost. The venue alone was going to run $18,000. My parents were covering the catering. Derek and Brianna were covering the flowers and the photographer. But the DJ, the rehearsal dinner, the bridesmaids' hair and makeup, the welcome bags for out-of-town guests, those things needed to be handled, my mother said. And since I was doing so well, she thought maybe I could help with a few of them. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I ended up covering $11,000 of that wedding. I paid for the rehearsal dinner at a restaurant my mother chose. I paid for every bridesmaid's hair and makeup, including Brianna's cousins I had never met. I paid for the DJ, the welcome bags, and the shuttle service from the hotel to the venue. I didn't give a speech because nobody asked me to. I was not in the wedding party because Brianna had her own sisters and her own friends, and that was completely understandable. I sat at a table near the back with some of Derek's college friends and their plus ones, and I smiled and I danced and I was happy for him. The reception was beautiful. The DJ was excellent. I know because I paid for him. Late in the evening, after the cake was cut and the first few tables had started to clear out, I was standing near the bar with a glass of wine when I heard my mother's voice carrying over the music. She was talking to my aunt, my father's sister, who I've always been close to. They were standing maybe 15 feet away, and the song that was playing had just ended. And in that moment of quiet, I heard my mother say, clear as anything, "Oh." Maya practically forced her way into helping. You know how she is. Always has to be involved. My aunt looked uncomfortable. She glanced over and saw me. My mother followed her gaze and looked at me too. She smiled. Then she turned back to my aunt and said something I couldn't hear, and they both laughed. I set my wine glass down very carefully on the bar. I smiled at the bartender. I thanked him. I walked to the coat check, got my things, and I went back to my hotel room. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for about an hour. I didn't cry. I thought about that. I thought about the fact that I wasn't crying, and I tried to figure out what I felt instead, and what I felt was something quieter than crying. Something that had been sitting in my chest for a long time, waiting for permission. I thought about the $800 a month, the $11,000, the water heater and Derek's tires, and my father's prescription. I thought about every phone call that started with "How are you?" and ended with a number. I thought about being called the easy one, about the school play, about being 17 and leaving with $3,000 I had earned myself because no one thought to tell me I didn't have to do it alone. I thought about always has to be involved. I didn't sleep much that night, but by morning I knew what I was going to do. I want to be clear that I did not make this decision in a single night. The wedding was in April. I didn't act until July. Those 3 months I spent very carefully and very quietly getting things in order. I went through my finances and I looked at every transfer I had made to my parents over the past 6 years. I had a number by the end of it. I won't say what it was here, but I will say that when I saw it written out, I sat very still for a long time. I also, during those months, had several phone calls with my mother that I recorded. My state allows single-party recording, which I had looked up. She called to ask if I could cover Derek and Brianna's first month of rent on their new apartment, because they were a little stretched after the honeymoon. She called to ask if I could contribute to a new fence for my parents' backyard. She called to tell me that Derek had his eye on a used truck, and that if I could pitch in even a little, it would mean a lot to the family. I said I'd think about it each time. I transferred nothing. In July, I called my mother and told her that I was changing my financial situation and that the monthly transfers would be stopping. There was a pause. Then she said, "What do you mean stopping?" I said I meant they were ending, that I had been contributing for 6 years, and I needed to redirect that money toward my own savings and goals. She said, "Maya, your father and I depend on that." I said I understood, and that I thought that was something we should have talked about openly a long time ago, but that it couldn't continue. She said, "You do this to us right after Derek's wedding? After everything we've done for you?" I asked her what she felt she had done for me. The call ended shortly after that. My father called the next morning. He was calmer than my mother, but the message was the same. I had always been the one they could count on. I was throwing that away. Was this about the wedding? Because if this was about the wedding, I needed to grow up and stop being so sensitive about every little thing. I told him I wasn't being sensitive. I told him I had made a clear financial decision, that it was my right to make it, and that I loved him and hoped we could talk more when things were less heated. He hung up. Derek texted me 2 days later. It was a long text, the kind that takes a few minutes to read, and the summary of it was this: I was selfish. I had always made everything about me. Brianna had noticed at the wedding how I was always hovering, always trying to take credit, always making the family dynamic weird. He said that maybe some space would be good, and that when I was ready to apologize, he'd be open to hearing it. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and finished the quarterly report I was working on. For 2 months, things were mostly quiet. My mother sent a few short texts. My father didn't reach out at all. Derek and I had no contact. I went to work. I had dinners with friends. I signed up for a pottery class that I turned out to be genuinely terrible at and loved anyway. I slept better than I had in years. Then my mother started calling more frequently. The voicemails started out measured and became less so. The fence still needed to be done, and now there was a leak in the upstairs bathroom. Dad's hours had been cut at work. They were not asking for much, just for me to reconsider, just to be reasonable, just to remember that family was family. In September, she called 11 times in one weekend. I let all of them go to voicemail. On a Sunday evening, I was on the couch with a book when my phone lit up with my husband's name. He was traveling for work and was 2 hours behind me. He said, "Hey, so your mother is here?" I closed my book. He said she had been there for a while. That when he'd walked to the window he could see her sitting on the porch steps. That he wasn't sure what to do. That he felt terrible just leaving her outside, but he also knew things had been complicated, and he didn't want to do the wrong thing. I love my husband. He is a kind person. He was genuinely uncertain and genuinely trying to do right by everyone, which is exactly who he is. I told him I was sorry she had put him in that position. I told him he could offer her some water through the door if he wanted to, but that he didn't need to let her in, and that she would leave when she was ready. I told him I would explain everything more when he got home. He asked if I was okay. I said I was. And I was. That's the part that still surprises me when I think back on it. I was completely okay. I hung up the phone, I made myself dinner, I watched something forgettable on television, and I went to sleep. She left after about 2 more hours, according to the security camera. The next morning, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was my aunt, my father's sister, the one from the wedding. She said she had been thinking about me and wanted to check in. She said she owed me an apology for not saying something sooner. She said she had known for a long time what was happening with my family, and she was ashamed that she hadn't spoken up. I called her back immediately. We talked for 2 hours. She told me things I hadn't known. She told me that she had watched, over the years, the way my parents spoke about me to extended family, that I was difficult, that I never seemed satisfied, that I was always a little too much. She had heard my mother take credit, more than once, for things I had paid for. She had heard my father describe Derek as the one holding the family together. She said, "I want you to know that I saw you. I always saw you. And I'm sorry I didn't say it louder." I had to put the phone down for a minute after that. She was the first person in my family who had ever said that to me. Not "you're so responsible" or "you're so easy." Not "we can always count on you." Just, "I saw you." I thought about how much I had needed to hear that. I thought about how long I had been doing things hoping someone would eventually say it. I thought about how I had spent 6 years and more money than I will write here trying to buy my way into being seen by people who had decided a long time ago not to look. Here is what I want to tell you, because I think some of you are in the same place I was in. Not the same exact story, yours might be louder or quieter, messier or colder. But the same fundamental thing. The thing where you love people who treat your love as a given, and your presence as optional. The thing where you keep hoping that if you just contribute more, try harder, need less, eventually they will meet you where you are. They won't. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I needed someone to say it to me, and nobody did for a very long time. My mother called me from a different number 3 weeks after she sat on my porch steps. She had clearly thought about what she was going to say, because she was very composed. She said that she wanted to have a real conversation, that she could see she had made mistakes, that she missed me. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "I recorded some of our conversations from earlier this year." She was quiet. I said I wasn't planning to do anything with them. I said I just wanted her to know that I had them, that I had been paying attention for a very long time, and I had been documenting things, and I understood our financial history very clearly. I said, "I don't want to be in conflict with you, but I also can't go back to the way things were. If you want a relationship with me, it has to look different. It has to be honest. It has to go both ways." She said she needed some time to think. I said, "That's fair. So do I." And that was where we left it. I don't know yet what comes next. I don't know if my mother is capable of the kind of honesty that a real relationship requires. I don't know if my father will ever stop seeing Derek's version of events as the real one. I don't know if things with Derek ever look like anything other than what they are right now. What I know is this: I woke up this morning and made coffee, and the apartment was quiet, and I had a full day of work ahead of me that I am good at, that I chose, that I built. I have a husband who asked me if I was okay and meant it. I have an aunt who said she saw me, and I believed her. I have friendships that do not require me to diminish myself to maintain them. I have money in savings that is mine because I stopped giving it to people who never once asked if I was okay. I have a life that is beginning, finally, to feel like something I actually live in. Not something I'm performing for an audience that has already decided how the story goes. The porch steps were cold that Sunday night. I know because I checked the weather for Cincinnati the next morning, as if that was something I needed to confirm. 41 degrees. She sat out there for nearly 2.5 hours in 41 degrees. I am not glad about that. I want to say that clearly. I don't want her to be cold, and I don't want her to be sad, and I don't want any of this to be what it is. But I also did not go to the door. And I think, for the first time in my life, I made exactly the right choice. If you're somewhere in the middle of a story like this, still deciding, still hoping, still sending the monthly transfer, and telling yourself it'll even out, I just want you to know that I understand. I really do. There is nothing shameful about loving people who don't know how to love you back the right way. There is nothing weak about hoping they'll figure it out. But there is also a door. And you're allowed to not open it. You're allowed to sit on your couch 2 states away, and make dinner and go to sleep, and let tomorrow be a day that belongs entirely to you. I had to learn that. I'm still learning it. But I'm learning it. That's enough for now.